So let me just read just a handful of verses from Acts. You don't have to flip there. You can stay at 1 Corinthians 8. But in Acts 15, 19 through 21, and then 28 through 29, we've got, "Therefore I have reached the decision that we should not trouble those Gentiles who are turning to God." Obviously, this is part of James's verdict at the end of the meeting they have in Jerusalem. "But we should write to them to abstain only from things polluted by idols and from fornication." Notice that porneia and meat sacrificed to idols go together. This might have to do with temple prostitution. It might simply have to do with the association of both, largely with Gentile pagan behavior. But from fornication, from whatever has been strangled, that is improperly butchered, and from blood. For in every city, for generations past, Moses has had those who proclaim him, for he has been read aloud every Sabbath in the synagogues. That's 15:19 to 21, and then 28 through 29 is, I love this phrase, "For it has seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us to impose on you or to lay down for you no further burden than these essentials or necessities ton epanagnes. There we go. I've been talking a lot today. That you abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication. If you keep yourselves from these, you will do well, fare well." That's the end of the letter. The thing to understand about that in Acts 15 is that it is narrated in a story. So, James does not have to be theologically right, and I do not think that he is. I think that the verdict that is passed at the end of Acts 15 is a verdict to ensure a mild version of Judaizing, and that the Antioch congregation goes along with it as a matter of peace for the church. But the idea that, when all foods are declared clean by Jesus' verdict in the Gospels, especially let's say Mark 7, on the nature of impurity, that somehow, therefore, it now becomes necessary or essential for Gentiles to, not consume food with blood in it. That would be, it's much harder, I think, scripturally to uphold the idea that James is right than it is to say that James is wrong, and Luke, as is his custom, is simply presenting you with what occurred, and you have to figure out what it means. Okay. But there's no doubt that the Antiochian congregation goes along with it, right? Thus resolving the difficulty. Notice, too, that in accord with the sort of reverse direction that the Judean congregation or Jerusalem congregation is moving in, like we talked about yesterday, instead of moving outward, they're always trying to pull someone else into their orbit to get them to do what they want. They themselves do not commission any missionaries whatsoever. Okay. So there's that, and then 21:25 in Acts. "But as for the Gentiles who have become believers, we have sent a letter with our judgment, that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what is strangled, and from fornication." The reason I read those things before we go into 8 through 11:1, which I'm sure we'll have more to say about tomorrow, is because I want you to recognize that Judaizing lines up well with certain anxieties that completely non-Jewish converts could also have. That is, we are too close to the pagans. Too close. And we need to get as far away as we possibly can. So the people, for instance, at the end of Romans, who are only eating vegetables, are they Jews? Are they Gentiles? Could be. Doesn't really matter. Because both groups could have high anxiety about being too close in their daily life to pagans. Okay? So if somebody says, I was involved in this realm of life before I became a Christian, therefore I just can't have anything to do with it, I understand. Makes sense. Okay? The issue is that binding on everyone else? And that is what Paul has to figure out. But the source of this anxiety in Corinth could be both or either Jewish anxiety about Gentiles or Gentile anxiety about pagan Gentiles. Okay. We're too close to them. And you should notice too that the stuff that we've been talking about in chapter 7 is related by James to the stuff that we're talking about in 8, 9, 10, and the beginning of 11. That is, when you're too close to Gentiles, you end up being sexually immoral. Okay? And that could literally have to do with temple prostitution, but it could just also have to do with, we all know how the Gentiles are and what they get up to. Anything on that Acts background, Judaizing, anything like that, before we go into chapter 8? Yeah.
Just an observation. I just catechized a young woman coming from significant pagan world view.
Right.
And so what ties in with everything we've been talking about in terms of preaching the text about life and a life aligned with the faith that we confess. That's so she recognizes this, that the teaching of the church is very distinct about life, is very distinct from her former way of life. And that would include teaching, preaching, and the divine service. So it's an encouragement if we think, and a discouragement from trying to mold our teaching and practice to the world to be attractive.
They have higher production values anyway, so.
Right. But it's just, that's her, unsolicited, I wasn't fishing for it. This is just her observation in reaction to the word and Lutheran catechesis.
Yeah, that's great.
Acts 15, if you were mentioning maybe they got it wrong, right? It says it pleased the apostles and elders, so it sounds like it was all the apostles, right? It wouldn't just be...
Including Paul.
Right, because Paul's there too,
Yeah, and the question you have to ask yourself is, why? Okay? And if James is theologically correct, why is Paul about to give the advice that he is in 1 Corinthians? I think the pleasure is they will leave us alone now. That's why I'm completely agnostic on when the events narrated in Galatians 2 happen, because I think it could happen before Acts 15 or after. Because this seems to be a hobby horse that is being ridden by the Judaizers constantly. And I think that the desire that Paul and Barnabas have, for instance, is simply to be left alone, because Acts 15, in sort of, let's say, the movement of the word of the Lord, is a distraction. It's a return to a place where the gospel is already being preached. Otherwise, Paul only returns to places to check on them. But this is a giant, it's frustration expressed by our esteemed host with district and synodical processes. It feels like an enormous distraction and a frustrating waste of time. So I think Paul goes along with that, with the verdict of it seemed good to the Holy Spirit and to us, because the problem should end now. They'll stop bothering us about this. But it's not what Paul doesn't establish food categories in Corinth.
Do you think is it possible to maybe they saw it as temporary? Possibly. Then, maybe they're like, okay, this is okay for now to get them off our back or to deal with this issue, but it's not.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, am I using the liturgies in Lutheran service book because they came down from God? No. I'm doing it for the sake of peace, good order, simplicity. I mean, like, this covers a lot of life, especially life with other people. It doesn't have, you shouldn't need like a mandate from God for everything you do. And if the guy doesn't have a mandate, you just never go along with it. For the sake of peace, you go along with it, even if you don't know why or whatever. It's fine. Yeah. So I think that what's happening is that Paul is, and also Barnabas, and they're being reasonable. And James really isn't. Because, I mean, the other thing you have to ask yourself about Acts 15 is, who made you in charge of everything? Nobody particularly. The mandate they have is preach the gospel to every creature. You will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. What exactly is the Jerusalem congregation doing to accomplish that? And who set them as judges over what everyone else does who is actually doing something? Nobody particularly. Yeah, go ahead.
So if Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and following does not make these distinctions, and he agrees in Acts 15, we'll go along with this to get you off our backs.
Yes.
Does he agree to go along with it just in word, or does he agree to go along with it also in the practice?
No, it could be that he says, look, guys, this is what we need to do. I don't know what he said or did when he brought the report back to Antioch. But when it is an abstract question, he doesn't do what almost every religion does, which is establish food categories of permitted and forbidden. Almost every other religion has that. Christianity does not. And to me, this is missiologically significant in the same way that we don't have a sacred language. Christianity gets translated. Also, without permitted and forbidden food categories, we are able to enter someone's culture without obliterating it. Because we're supposed to translate, not only linguistically, but also culturally. That is, maybe it might not be utterly unique, but it's very unusual among religions. Let me read a little bit in 1 Corinthians 8. He says, now concerning food offered to idols, and that's a little weak, the NRSV, which is often horrible, but is the English in the synopsis here, actually is stronger because it's sacrificed. It's things sacrificed to idols. We know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, or it does the exact same thing that leaven does in 5. It makes me arrogant, in other words. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. That's great. It's just great. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. Therefore, as to the eating of food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol has no real existence and that there is no God but one. Your English Bible probably has quotation marks. It probably is something they said, but it doesn't have to be. It could just be Paul saying, these are premises we all agree upon. For although there may be so-called gods in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things and for whom we exist, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things and through whom we exist. However, not all possess this knowledge. So when we get into this further categorical distinction between weak and strong, understand that that's premised on a distinction of knowledge. A distinction of knowledge. The basic difference leading to others expressed, the basic difference between the weak and the strong is a distinction of knowledge. Not everybody has the same knowledge. but some, through former association with idols, let's see how literal that is. Okay. Yeah, I mean, association is, not there in Greek, but it's a good, I think it's a translation. They had knowledge of idols. Eat food as really offered to an idol. And their conscience, being weak through what? Through lack of knowledge, is defiled, right? So they don't know better. They don't know it's not real. And they eat, and then they're sinning against their own conscience. Okay, so what is actually happening here? What's happening is that, like I said, I think yesterday, the meat available in an ancient city is going to be meat that has some association with pagan sacrifice. That's why such animals are brought into city limits. That's why they're killed. That's why the meat is distributed. Okay? So it's highly statistically improbable that you would be eating meat in an ancient city of any size that had no association with a pagan temple. So that's a good bet, right? If I'm eating meat and I live in Saudi Arabia, it was probably offered to Allah before I ate it. Yeah? Okay. So should I avoid, I live in Dearborn, Michigan, should I avoid going out to eat because it's probably all halal at this point, right? So that's where we are, right? It's offered to idols. In all likelihood, it's all offered to idols. Can I theoretically eat it? Sure. I don't believe in that God, and I offer thanks to the true God when I eat it. Everything that has been made is to be received with prayer and thanksgiving. That's not Paul's concern. Paul's concern is about the weak one. You're going to notice nobody gets to say he's weak. Paul's just saying that there are people who are. But I don't think he's envisioning that someone says, sorry, I'm weak, so now you have to do what I want. Okay? All right. He's talking to the strong here, so let's keep going. Food will not commend us to God. If it did, then eating what is from the permitted category would, and eating what is from the forbidden category would not commend us to God. So you see, Paul's not establishing a hard and fast set of categories. This is okay. This is not okay. Don't drink coffee if you're Mormon. Okay? Don't drink alcohol if you're Muslim. Right? Don't mix your meat and your milk if you're Orthodox Jewish. Right? He's not establishing hard and fast food categories. He's establishing concern for the weak. So how does he go on? We are no worse off if we do not eat, and no better off if we do. This is why I can't take James's pronouncement seriously, because it's just not the same thing. It's not a food category. But take care that this right of yours does not somehow become a stumbling block to the weak. And the word right is actually the word exousia, which is power or authority, most often elsewhere translated. Exousia, the thing you are authorized to do. Hey, exousia. Okay. For if anyone sees you who have knowledge, that is, whose consciences are properly informed that these idols are not real, who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will he not be encouraged, if his conscience is weak, to eat food offered to idols? Paul's concern is that the person who doesn't really know a whole lot is going to fall back into the sin he just escaped because he doesn't understand the difference between your knowledge and his. So there he goes, and he thinks, it's okay for Bob, so it's okay for me. Okay? And so by your knowledge, this weak person is destroyed. The brother, for whom Christ died. Thus, sinning against your brothers and wounding their conscience when it is weak, you sin. This is Paul being very, asserting this identity between the Christian and Christ. You sin against Christ. Therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. All right. You have a concern about that we can address in the next 7 to 8 minutes? How this could be misused, how this is misused? Anybody? Yeah.
About the reason, about the seeming shift here from eating of meat to dining in idol temples. They wouldn't seem to me to be identical.
They are identical. They are identical. I can't get meat really outside that context. So
It would be like the idols here have the appearance of almost being the then restaurants. Like where would I go to have my kid's birthday party? Like there's a
right.
And then you buy burgers when you're there.
Yeah, right before you walk into Chuck E. Cheese, I show you their Pride Month Twitter post. You want to go to Chuck E. Cheese? You want to give them money? Okay. Well, I don't offer sacrifices to Pride Month, so sure, I want to play skee ball and have an ice cream cake. Go ahead, yeah.
So why wouldn't Paul say, instead of I will never eat meat, why wouldn't he say, I will properly inform my brother's conscience?
Right. It's hard to say because he's not really going to address what is incumbent upon the weak. Because I don't think the weak are the issue. They're not causing the problem directly. It seems to me like a whole separate question. Like insisting on being the weak brother by refusing to learn more is its own problem that he's not really addressing. But I learned this already, or I went through confirmation, now I'm done, or whatever it is where you're refusing to learn more of the doctrine of Christ, that's its own problem. Yeah. Go ahead, Amy. Yeah.
He seems to be making a specific application of using the same language of Jesus of don't put a stumbling block, right? Or unless you get a millstone hung around your neck and cast into the sea, and that kind of, he's using the same language here. And I realize it can be abused, but on the flip side, sometimes maybe, especially as Lutherans, the whole sin boldly mentality, we don't think much about the weaker brother, or that like our actions could cause someone to stumble or to be scandalized, right? The word there. We often don't think about that side of things, perhaps.
Yeah, I think if there is an attitude of antagonism or sort of like everywhere I go, I'm a Lutheran pastor, so I'm like in a state of confession against whatever, then there is a sort of, to me it seems like sort of a perverse imitation of Luther, whether or not it's right. Is it just a sort of like a harshness or an intensity that is often unhelpful, right? Or, and so to me it seems totally cultural. Like I don't think I converted to this, or like it was not part of anything that I signed up for, but it's sort of like a, you're either with me or you're against me attitude on many, many things. And it's like, a lot of things, it's like, look, I can see you're pulling basically in the same direction, so I'm not gonna like, call you on the carpet. And that has to do, Paul is presuming that harshness with the weak would be unwise and possibly destructive. Yeah.
I was wondering if, at least in my congregations, if it's legitimately an analogy that we have converts from either Mormonism or fundamentalist Baptist theology, and for them the consumption of alcohol, though they can understand the Lutheran sort of position on, we enjoy a drink without being drunk, to the point of drunkenness. It's like, so for instance, my secretary, she had been a Pentecostal for a long time, fundamentalist Pentecostal, and the church was trying to get her to go buy the wine for the Lord's Supper. And even though she had converted like that year and become a Lutheran, she had a fit of conscience walking into a liquor store.
Yeah.
To carry it.
Right, yeah. No, that's a great example. Yeah.
And so I told her, don't worry about it. Nobody's going to force you to do this.
Right.
I'll do it myself.
Yeah. Right.
Is it a good fit of conscience for her?
I don't think it's necessary, but you have to understand that from how she grew up, she was told from being a little child that only wicked people go and buy liquor for the purpose of getting drunk and doing wicked things against one.
Yeah.
That's a lie.
Yeah, but it's also so deeply ingrained in her that it causes intense discomfort.
Yeah. The question is like.
So intellectually, I think she understands, right?
It causes my son intense discomfort to make his bed. Do it anyways.
There's also.
I just feel like arguing this afternoon.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. We like it. We're enjoying your hospitality. There's also a cultural thing here. So I would have people move from the Midwest, and they make jokes about, "Oh, pastor, you must enjoy this, that, or the other thing," and that's just not part of the culture. There's no alcohol at social events in Pennsylvania ever, unless you're Catholic. If you're Catholic, you have alcohol. If you're not Catholic, there's no alcohol. That's just the way it is. It's not good or bad. It just is. So yeah, and I don't know. Do you push people that fast? No. I mean, I had people that converted. That's the first time they ever drank alcohol is when they took communion the day they were.
Yeah, in this woman's case, this was what happened.
Yeah.
We had worked through that.
Yeah, right. And that's about as much alcohol as they're ever going to consume.
Did this lady ever drink?
Never before.
So
Before communion.
Yeah. But she did drink the Lord's Supper.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Bill.
Well, I think about Peter when he was given the vision and, rise, kill, and eat. He's been eating like a Jew for how many years? And he's going to eat pork now?
Yeah, so your test for Peter that day is like, you will have pork chops, is that what do we just make them OD on the thing they thought was horrible and then they're over it, or, I don't know. No, probably not. Probably not. Yeah, Tom.
Well, it's interesting as I was putting the bulletin together for this week, which, it's Mark 7.
There you go. Yeah.
And it has a picture of ribs and shellfish. And that's the picture that Riojas had put together, for higher things that they sold for that Sunday.
Interesting. Huh. I only ever did 1 year, so I don't think I ever saw for me, it was always, when do I get to the Sunday where there's like the screaming demon coming out of the guy's mouth? That's like the worst Sunday. We've all been there, yeah. So I never got ribs and shellfish, so. All right, we're at 4. Our hospitable host is back, so.